Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. Very much appreciated. I know that we connected a couple of weeks ago, really around, what we've been doing here at Asset Mule and just really trying to dig into the product marketing function and learn a lot more. And I was just blown away by the level of insight and expertise you have around this function. So thank you so much for taking the time. By the way, how are you today?
I'm great, and thanks for having me on the show. I mean, the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, I think was awesome. I absolutely love what you're producing with Asset Mule, and I think it's going to be a huge time saver for all product marketers.
Yeah, we're trying our best. And it's interesting because there's this weird paradox, not weird, but interesting. I should say exciting. I don't know why I say weird, in that what we're doing right now, it's is a founder motion, but at the same time, it's one of the things that I think PMMs are tasked with at organizations, right? No matter how you sort of slice it, like being able to communicate and understand the market and figure out how do you actually speak that language, but also fill in the gaps and make sure that what you're building is constantly adding value. Seems so much in line with what PMMs tend to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in addition to just obviously your day-to-day tasks, there's also how do you manage other departments? Because in product marketing, you know that you're the spear of the tip, or sorry, the tip of the spear, I should say, when it comes to all things new and
Mm.
everything existing. So you really do become sort of a central repository of information in your own little department.
Well, why don't you take a quick second to just kind of tell us a little bit about your journey from a career perspective into becoming a product marketer and it's like an expert at this point in it.
Yeah, it's actually really funny. I think when you talk to anyone in product marketing or anyone who's a solutions engineer, which is what I was prior to going officially into product marketing, you get some really interesting stories as to how people transition. And the one common theme that I find in both of those roles is you don't go seeking the role. Somehow you end up in it. Just everybody just landed in it some way, somehow. And I have to say that's very true for myself. Originally, my career started off in public relations. That's what I went to school for. I was a communications manager for a radio station. Then I went into nonprofit for a little while, went into the corporate side. But the interesting thing is, what the year I graduated was actually the year of a recession. So between 2007 to 2009, there was a slight recession in Canada, and obviously global markets were also impacted slightly. Um, and I remember a guest speaker came into our college class and was like, so the number of jobs that are available right now in the GTA is currently sitting at 15,000. And from 2007 to 2008, that number has now been reduced to 12,000. And when I graduated in 2009, the number of PR and communication jobs available in the market was actually sitting at around 7,500 jobs available across the GTA, which shows you that the times were changing. And I didn't quite understand it coming out of school, what that meant, what it meant for my career at the time. I didn't expect as much change and as much turmoil as I went through in the very beginning. I kept finding myself in contract positions for the first 3 years post graduation. And then I got a random call from a headhunter one day asking me if I knew what a social media vendor was. And I was like, I know about social media. And I talk about it all the time. And this is how he found me, anyways, is that I was actually at a conference speaking about social media strategy to I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but I was also working with a group of seniors who were veterans in the real estate space
Mm.
and telling a 60-year-old Italian man that he needs a Facebook page in order to promote his sales pages was like pulling teeth back then. So it was interesting that someone actually heard my conversation and then thought, okay, this might be an interesting job fit for you. So I took a chance. I did the interview and it moved fairly quickly. And I knew from the interview process that this was something I was very interested in. I
Mm.
think it checked off a lot of the boxes that I had career wise. I was told you're not going to know what your day to day looks like in PR. And I felt like my day to days were pretty predictable.
Mm.
I loved the fact that this role was a little bit more unpredictable, a little bit more client facing. And going through the interview process, spoke to a recruiter on Tuesday, had an interview with the director on Wednesday, went in for an in-person interview on the Friday, went on vacation, came back, found out I got the job. So that's how I ended up being an SE for about the next 10 years of my career, which was some of the best and most interesting experiences that I've had. Hence why I learned more about the product side, how to, communicate and work with sales. And this is sort of the unofficial beginning of product marketing for me, because product marketing wasn't a function that existed 10, 15 years ago. It was fairly new. It was a newer concept unofficially because we didn't have a large marketing presence in two of the organizations that I first worked for. Product marketing kind of fell into the solution engineering team.
Mm.
So things like competitive intelligence was a responsibility that fell underneath our group. Things like knowing our competitors' products and how do we talk about it and tell sales to position themselves against a competitor somehow became a tactic that we worked on. So unofficially, it was my unofficial start into product marketing. And I think I always knew I wanted to officially go into product marketing. And the time came and the time felt right after 10 years of being an SC. I couldn't do any more demos. I could not be repetitive on calls anymore. I needed to change. So the official switch happened and I went into product marketing, which has been one of the most rewarding experiences so far.
That reminds me of Stephanie Madsen, who is, I think she's a People AI. She was on the show a couple episodes ago, and she was an SE who transitioned to go into product marketing. And there's just, I think, that level of expertise, like that hands-on experience with the product, as you mentioned, is just so valuable. Also understanding the other side, right? A lot of the time we hear these stories of like, and I think it's been this way as long as I can remember, alignment issues between marketing and sales. And so to have been on the other side and now going on to the marketing side and bringing that experience, I think is super valuable, and it really helps a lot with those alignment challenges that we have sometimes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting that we brought up the alignment topic this early in the conversation because it is a big one. You mentioned a little bit earlier, I've kind of worked in different orgs where I've seen examples of how alignment looks from department to department to process down to how do you actually execute strategy, because it's kind of a battle on who owns what piece in some departments or in some organizations. Does the responsibility lie with sales? Does it lie with marketing? And it's a fine line to walk sometimes depending on your org structure.
Absolutely, right. Depending on your org structure, and that figuring out those nuances seems so important. Speaking of product marketing in sort of the who owns what and in the nuances between the different org designs, from your perspective and your experience, how do organizations kind of determine what that product marketing individual or individual should focus on?
Yeah, and that's a great question because I've seen different examples of it in a few different places now. And then also talking to folks through Product Marketing Alliance during the cocktail hours and networking events. Everyone's department structure is very different. For example, I've spoken to folks that have broken out their product marketing departments by functions. So one person's job is to focus solely on messaging. The other person only does commercialization. The only other person does sales enablement, and someone else does messaging. And I think if that works for your product, depending again on your org structure, number of products that you have, etc., that could be a structure that works really well for you. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and I think it's a matter of playing with structures that might work. Now, I am one of those people that loves to be involved in everything because I like to see the whole picture and also get a grasp of the details so that we can paint both the little picture and the big picture at the same time. So for me, that type of structure is not something that I adore because I definitely want to be involved so that it's not this segmented process of, okay, send it to research first. Once research is complete, then send it to messaging. Once messaging is complete, then send it to positioning. I think it's a collective group effort in order for us to actually determine those together, because what if there's something in the messaging and positioning that I wasn't able to address during the research phase? I didn't have that opportunity to give an input there. So for me, I don't personally love that structure, but if it works well for an organization, then good. You might have found a sweet spot where that's the format that works for you. In other organizations, you have someone who is doing all of those jobs all at once per a product line. So again, it really comes down to the structure of how many products do you have, how many people are in the org, and what's the best way for you to actually manage everyone's time. Does it make sense to also group things by business units? Do certain products fall under certain business category that you can actually combine the research efforts, messaging, and positioning under versus the individualized products? So I think it really does come down to, your org and, number of products you have, number of people you have, and the actual workflow. And also one thing that really can impact that is also your product roadmap. I think if you have an extremely aggressive product roadmap, you're probably going to need more product marketers to keep on top of the changes. If you're doing, bi-weekly changes, even if they're minor releases, or if you're doing major releases once a month, that's a lot of work for, a few people to keep on top of if releases are coming that quickly. If your releases are coming a lot slower, we are doing quarter releases, that gives a lot more time to plan and execute and strategize on product marketing.
Let me ask you something. That first scenario where it's got to go through these multiple layers just to get done. I know you were, being pretty diplomatic with with those processes, right? But let me ask you, how many times have you actually seen that work really well versus organizations just operating from a compliance sort of covering their, backsides perspective, right? Because I don't know, maybe that's why I've loved startups and I've always been at a startup for the most part, where you have less of that. And I understand the need to make sure that things are done properly and that we're in compliance with messaging and branding and maybe some legal nuances and those sort of things as well.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we how many times does it actually really work where you don't have disgruntled employees or folks who are in conflict?
Yeah. And from personal experience, I have not found a good example of that working really well yet. I can say from one org structure where that was the case for me, I felt really disconnected. And I also felt disconnected from my own team because I didn't feel like we were collaborating. That move from piece to piece to piece because of the function of what product marketing was didn't allow us to collaborate together or learn from each other. Because, like I said, if I'm in charge of messaging, but someone else is in charge of research, what if there was something that I needed that's critical for me to create a message around said new feature or product, but you didn't address that in the research phase? Do we then have to start from the beginning of the process to go back to messaging? Because I just found it was too much back and forth, and then there was deliberation, and then you go through the approvals and you get the opinions of everyone else. I think research really is a critical phase that everybody should be a part of, because I think as we get into more, software that allows us to collaborate better. I mean, look at cloud software. All of a sudden, we went from using, let's take Microsoft Word, for example, one Word document that you created a document, saved it, send it to someone else, and then they would edit it, pass it back to you. With cloud solutions, you're able to collaborate in real time with your colleagues. You could get on a Google Doc right now, and every single person could be in a brainstorming session and actually contribute to that document in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And that way I felt a little bit more connected. So we were all on the same page. There wasn't this breakdown of communication between my own team members and my own department. So I think it's one that it's ambitious, but I just don't think it works well. Or at least I have not found an example of that works really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the issues that big organizations have, right? Where they over-engineer and add too many layers and those sort of things. And again, we all understand it, right? We totally get it. But how do we find something that's sort of meeting in the middle, right?
Yeah. And it's actually almost a good segue too, because there's a lot of conversation these days about how humans work. And technology is a vessel that we use on a regular basis. And I think really great solutions actually look at how people work versus designing a system based on an architectural framework that already exists in the market. if you can create something that saves someone time, and this is, we get into a little bit the AI conversation here and how far-fetched it's gotten. If AI is here to automate some of those clicks that I find annoying in a solution and can reduce my workflow from, conception to approval, that's a win for me. And right now, some of the biggest players that you see in the market are addressing those things, but putting human-centric design and how we work as humans at the forefront of the product design.
Human centric. Isn't this funny how as we move into the future and build all this amazing technology, we always end up circling back to the fundamentals, right? But be our humanity and what makes us really so special as beings. I was talking to an AI founder on this show earlier today, and what he kept talking about was kind of like the fact that we've thrown a bunch of technology at sales reps, because he was building what he's calling a co-pilot sales assistant kind of AI co-pilot right now, and that it was really core to him to be able to really harp on the fact that it's not about like replacing the human or replacing the thinking, right? And all the human stuff that we do so well, but being that co-pilot, right? Being that person in shotgun, or that being or AI in shotgun that's helping assist. So I just find it so interesting that we always end up going back to our humanity, and I really love this human centric approach now. It's really fascinating how it's sort of coming to fruition here as a category, and I'm seeing more and more people talk about it on social alongside the this whole AI revolution, right?
Yeah. And you brought up a great point around the human centric sales approach too. We're still, I find, because I've been able and been really fortunate in my career to work with folks who went through the 80s and sold tech and then went into the dot-com boom and then obviously joined this new cloud era. It is a very interesting conversation to hear their perspective and how sales has evolved from the 80s to today, because a lot of what they learned in the 80s is still applicable in terms of a selling approach, and it is that human centric. How do you convince someone to purchase? And they've been doing it. It's just that it's now revamped and trying to be a little too process orientated now. And I think I've seen from a sales perspective in the last 5 years, more so than anything, the sales training and sales enablement has gotten very tech process orientated and less human centric. Like, you can create email campaigns for your BDRs to go do some cold calling pitches and, give them the templates, give them the messaging, give them the positioning. But again, where's that human element? Where's your voice in that sales cycle that makes you unique, that someone wants to actually pay attention to you? Because even though I'm giving you the messaging positioning, I'm just giving you the starting point for a conversation, really and truly. You add value when you speak to the customer because you understand what the technology is. You're not just selling them this concept of here's an NLP engine or an algorithm. Everybody has an algorithm. What makes you so special?
Yeah.
Then you start going down the tech rabbit hole. And I've seen so many sales reps get caught up, and I would say more junior sales reps that are entering startups because they're not given that training. And if the startups can't afford things like Sandler training or any other sales methodology training in the very beginning, that aspect of human-centric conversation is almost gone missing because we've gone full tech process. Here's our email campaign, set it up, do this touch point, set up a customer journey, no response within 2 weeks, send out another email, here's your follow-up. I just need to give you the starting points. You still have to find what makes you unique in the sales realm, because if you can speak to a customer at their level in their language, while also taking my messaging and positioning, you're probably going to have a better conversation with that customer than just verbatim, repeating what I just told you to say.
Awesome. Well, that's actually a really good segue into my next question, because I've really been honing in on this, trying to figure out what the answer is. Like, what would you say are the top attributes that like a top PMM have?
Flexibility is definitely one of the probably number one thing you will need as a product marketer to be successful. I think a lot gets thrown at product marketing that makes you spin on your heels several times a day. If there's a new competitor that drops something all of a sudden, that could set panic off. You might have to change your positioning and messaging because the competitors beat you to the market. And again, this is going to depend on your industry and the software that you're selling or the product that you're selling. Things might vary. Or there could be, if you're working for a manufacturer, for example, if you had a product that was supposed to come out, let's say Coca-Cola, for example, comes out with the new Coca-Cola creation, and all of a sudden there's now a PR disaster. How does that now impact your product marketing strategy for the go-to-market motion? Because there's so many things that can happen that change right before a launch. And sometimes you're running with a chicken with like no head on. And I've been in that situation a lot too, where, last minute, we have all these plans for a launch on a certain day. And then all of a sudden, engineers are finding there's an issue with the code or something didn't go right on deployment, or when they moved into production, we're finding other issues that now we need to push that release out an additional 2 weeks and you need to pivot. So it's an interesting challenge. Flexibility is definitely needed. I think the second thing that's needed to be successful is patience, because you're going to need a lot of it. You are that go-to person. You are that person that everyone's going to come ask questions, because not only if you're working in a startup, everyone's going to ask you what's on the roadmap, what's happening, when can I get this, when can I start talking to customers about that, when do we release this, like, is it okay for me to say X, Y, and Z? So you're constantly fielding questions, so you're going to have a lot of patience. And I find really successful product marketers as well just keep everyone in the loop. It's not just the product managers you work with and the sales department. It could also be your support teams. How are you going to help support when this feature goes live or this product goes live? Did you set up KPIs for that team as well, in addition for the launch, as well as CSMs, which is also an interesting segue into sort of our original topic where we talked about structure. There's the battle between customer marketing and then product marketing as well. And sometimes, for me, I treat every customer as a customer, whether paid or not. Either you are interested in the product or a feature, that you purchased it because it either convinced you to, or I've already convinced you to purchase the product. How do I keep you at this point? Because retention's another thing, and churn that we know is very popular in the CSM side. Even though this feature came out, I still want to know what our existing customers think about it. Because if it's not keeping them happy, then did we do our job properly? Did I mess up my messaging and positioning? It's not just about attracting new business, it's also retaining our existing customers as well.
Which is so important, especially these days, right? Where we've seen so much chaos within our market. And I think organizations now are not abandoning, of course, net new for obvious reasons, but starting to really dig into their existing customer base and figure out how do we retain and how do we expand, right? And making happier, more, profitable, ultimately profitable customers, right? With SaaS, the long-term, efficiency, and the longer that they are customers, obviously adding more value. If you were to think about like processes that you've seen work really well around developing that messaging and positioning, and maybe the lens is like early stage, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also this is something that evolves over time. You talked about, sort of our reaction if a competitor releases something and now we need to alter or modify our messaging and positioning. Any sort of frameworks or processes that you see really work well?
I don't think I have a particular framework or process that works really well. I think it also comes down to the process that's set in the organization. And I think that's also something that's unique to every org, and especially within startup land. I find that there's a lot of churn in startup, and everyone that comes into product marketing obviously wants to come in with their ideas and their frameworks that they're comfortable with or have worked with in the past. So it becomes a mishmash of a multitude of frameworks that get mashed into this brand new one because one person prefers this one over that one, and et cetera. And then you end up working with something that is completely customized for your organization. Or it becomes really one-sided where, your VP is dictating exactly what it is that you need. One framework that I do absolutely love that I think is helpful, but I'm starting to question how helpful it is now that everyone's also using it, the same frameworks. And this is something that I'm kind of noticing. We're all using the exact same frameworks and templates, that you're seeing a lot of similarity in industries with similar products. You take April Dunford's obviously awesome, and you take her strategizer positioning and messaging exercises and you do them, and they are super helpful. Do not get me wrong. They are amazing. They are super helpful for getting to the core of your what it is and helping to understand what this feature is. And it's great for, explaining this to sales later and creating sales enablement documents. However, everyone's doing this. Now you're starting to see if everyone's selling a CRM solution, every CRM solution has those three keywords of what they are. We're reliable, we're user friendly, and we're trustworthy, whatever those three things are. And I'm starting to see really a lot of startups take on those frameworks, and I can't differentiate what the differences are between their products. So I think as we're developing frameworks and everyone's kind of creating a mishmash, and you have sort of different product marketing groups that also provide those as they develop their own curriculums, you're starting to see a lot of similarity in the market now, where I can, as a product marketer, can identify that everyone's speaking the same language, but I cannot differentiate what our advantage is now, because we're all trustworthy, we're all reliable, and we're all customer centric.
Makes total sense. It reminds me of kind of the frameworks that we use in sales and the tools, right? When you continue to have multiple organizations or salespeople sending that messaging, it can become quite overwhelming, and you're just sort of turn off, right? Like, oh, I'm seeing the pattern here. How do you know that what you're putting out there in terms of messaging and positioning is resonating really well? I mean, we have, of course, conversion metrics and these sort of things, but from what I understand, so much of what we do as product marketers is touching so many different sides of the business. So yeah, if you have a landing page for a webinar, let's say, or some sort of ad that was informed by product marketing, messaging, and positioning, which hopefully it was, and you're sort of, benchmarking it against what it used to be, and you're seeing a conversion rate increase, that obviously that's an easy way of assuming, okay, well, it could be, the messaging. We saw that direct correlation. But in a world where it touches so much, where PMM's work touch so many things, how do you know what's working?
That's a great question. And I think as product marketers, we are very data centric at times. I know I am, and I think that's also what might make me a little bit different, is that I love diving into data. Please show me where the data is and let me go do my thing, because I can take data and probably translate it in a few different ways. For example, I love Gong. If there is Gong, I love listening to the sales calls myself to see how someone is reacting to it. So again, part of my go-to-market motion when I'm going to launch, I will put in a tracker for this new feature or new product that we just launched, so that when the Gong calls are happening, when they start to talk about it in a sales call, that tracker can now pick it up. So then I go in and, set some time aside in the end of my week, go into Gong, take out that one tag, and go listen to all the calls that tagged with that particular feature or launch or whatever the case may be. And then I'll listen to it and analyze all the data. And of course, Gong does a great job of calculating things like sentiment. But again, sentiment is one of those things that's very biased depending on who it is and who's listening, because we all have different perceptions. But I do want to go and listen and then try to take as much bias out of my own listening skills, and then try to apply that while I listen to the call to see, did this land, did it not? If questions are being asked, if the customers aren't quite understanding it, if they're starting to dig into it because they don't believe it, which is something that I've got to listen to on a few different calls, then I knew my messaging wasn't sticking. And a great example of this is that I had messaging for a feature that came out, and it was a new AI solution that we were launching. And unfortunately, it just wasn't sticking. I got a lot of questions about it. And on every customer call, it was like, well, how did you do that? What's the magic behind it? They really wanted to understand how we got to this AI solution that could help do all these things, because the impact it had on the business at the end of the day could be in the millions of dollars. So if my AI solution was telling you something was broken and it wasn't broken, I might have just cost you and your job and your company $2 million, and I'm really sorry. So again, it also comes down to risk of what your feature does. So I was a little bit scared of that one. I think that was one of the launches where I was a little bit hesitant and kind of had heart palpitations and woke up with, really bad acid reflux for a couple of weeks because what I thought I put out there made sense. And then listening to calls, it wasn't sticking. Even worse was listening to the existing customers ask questions. And then when I looked at the support tickets that were supporting it, the number of support tickets that came in because they wanted to do additional things that it currently wasn't capable, that they were hoping that we were releasing, didn't meet the mark. So there's a lot of things that I will look at outside of it. There's Salesforce data. I want to look at that as well. There's the Gong data. If you have Gainsight, I'm definitely going to go in there. Any CX tools, I'm going to be in there. Pretty much any of your research tools, I want the research access to, so I can do a post-mortem, post-launch. How is this going? Because I think one of the things that, product marketing is very focused on is that go-to-market motion a lot. One thing that we kind of don't really do after, or as I haven't seen done as much, is go as in depth on a post-mortem of how successful was that launch.
Awesome. Question. What would you say, and I know there's probably quite a few challenges out there that PMMs face, but what would you say are, like, maybe we start off with one, like some of the biggest challenges that all PMMs face that, really can be avoided?
Yeah, I think one challenge is definitely the org structure one, especially when someone who's new to product marketing is entering an organization. I think it's great to give someone exposure so they can learn. Because if you're also setting up your org structure where you have that process of let's do research, then messaging, then positioning, et cetera, you're not giving someone the opportunity to really understand it. It's one thing to learn, because I'm finding that there's a lot of new product marketers in the industry as well who are taking a lot of product marketing courses because they think it's what they want to do. There's what you want to do, and then there's actually what you do. And I think when you get to the what you actually do, you actually want to start learning more. So if you're not given that exposure, how do you know that's something you really want to focus on? And this actually speaks to all of marketing. I think one thing that's really common with product marketers is that we tend to go through different departments before we land in product marketing. But if you don't kind of explore and have exposure into different departments and experience in different areas, you're never going to know what it is you love and don't love about it. Because if every org is going to keep that structure, and that's the type of roles you want to continue applying to because it's what you're used to, then you don't know if you love commercialization more than research, or that messaging over positioning. So I think giving people exposure and also just allowing people to learn and collaborate will allow you to also determine whether whether you want to focus on this in your career or whether you want to explore it further.
Awesome. Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom. I think it's very clear as you speak to this topic how much experience you have and kind of just all the little nuances. If folks want to learn more, I know you have a podcast.
Yeah.
Why don't we tell folks a little bit about that and where they can find it?
Absolutely. So I have a podcast called Maker to Market. It is on all the major podcast networks. So Spotify, Apple Music, Google, iHeartRadio, they're all on there. So however you tune into your podcast, it is available. The show's a little bit different where I actually don't talk about product marketing. I actually talk about product management and product development. So that show will focus a little bit more on some nuances in terms of how technology is evolving over time and how we're adapting to those changes and how to be successful. So if you're interested in becoming a maker to market, or interested in learning even about how product marketing and even product development can work together better, definitely take a listen.
Awesome. And if folks want to connect with you on social, what would be the best channels to reach you?
I am only available on LinkedIn at this hour. I have done a complete social detox of my life. So if you do want to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to chat or set up some time to connect over a coffee.
Awesome. And as you can hear, my dog Arthur saying hi in the background just on On cue here.
Or he's just ending this for us. He's ready for his
Absolutely.
walk.
Well, have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thanks again for having me.